Hey everyone, Cell here. Welcome back to another video where I'm covering 4 potentially off-meta League starters for you. If you're like me and have an innate desire to be a hipster in everything that you do, and especially your Path of Exile builds, this video might be for you. I'm definitely not making any claims as to how good they'll be or how League start viable or SSF viable they are. I personally think they're all pretty viable, but they could be pretty bad. Some of them, nobody really knows how they'll pan out. So they're definitely experimental and probably a little bit questionable. But at the very least, I would argue they're built on good foundations. So if this gives you an idea, definitely don't be afraid to tweak things to your liking to try it out on League Start. So first up here is just a level 60 tree of Balers. Don't know how to pronounce their name in the upper left over here, but I saw them do a speedrun. I've been watching their Act 10 speedruns on their channel lately before the league start, just to get an idea of how to improve my leveling times and things like that, and also checking out what sort of builds people would do for that sort of thing. I'm aiming to go fairly fast myself this league start, so that's been pretty handy for me. And one of the builds he did that caught my attention the most was Stormburst Totems. Stormburst is not a skill I remembered existed until his video, so that surprised me greatly. I'd like to think I have a handle on a lot of things in the game. I've played it for 10 years, so to be surprised that a skill exists is something else for me. And the gameplay looked a lot better than I thought it would, considering it's a channeled skill on a totem, which is kind of a theme at times. I feel like channeling skills on totems sometimes don't feel so bad. So I would definitely recommend going and checking out his video on that to see how the gameplay feels. And there's a link in the description of that video to another more in-depth totem-based guide from Titaniel, if that's how you pronounce that, who is known as like the go-to totem person right now. So I would definitely check this out. It's an interesting take for sure. It seemed pretty smooth, and the reason I'm suggesting this now is not completely out of the blue. I think it would be pretty good with Spellblade support, because it's a physical-based skill, we can see, with built-in lightning conversion. So this is really good because physical to elemental scaling, everybody knows, is pretty great. It's one of the best ways to scale damage in the game because of things like Hatred, Herald of Ash, etc. Physical gain is elemental, and then you have multiple ways to scale your damage via percentages or more multipliers. So if you like the totem playstyle, that one might be one for you. Again, this is level 60 tree because it was a Kitava speedrun, so didn't need to go past that point, which is why there's like a fire cluster here. The description of the video goes into why that is. It's more of a speedrun thing, but this can certainly be adapted, I think, to a more endgame and mapping-oriented setup. Next up, we have a Corrupting Cry champion from xaitv, who I believe does some work on like the Zizaran build guides, if I'm not getting people mixed up, which I hope I'm not. So this was posted on Reddit the other day. I'll link to the Reddit thread down below as well, r/Path of Exile builds, and it was essentially just kind of a template sort of deal for if you wanted to go with a Corrupting Cry build, and it looks pretty sturdy. They presented it as possibly a starting approach before you get into an endgame Corrupting Fever setup. Personally, I think Corrupting Fever, I've never played it standalone, but it sounds horrible to me, which is why I've never played it standalone. And this type of build seems like it could be pretty smooth. General idea behind it is you're using Corrupting Cry as often as you can. The support gem is not in path of building at the moment. I have an update ready, so it might be at this point, but it whenever you Warcry with a Warcry supported by Corrupting Cry, you'll apply 4 stacks of Corrupted Blood, which at level 20 are 600 damage each. That's equivalent to 8 stacks of Corrupting Fever. So then it's about twice as much damage. And one of the great parts, in my opinion, is you can make Warcries an instant skill with Call to Arms. So they share a cooldown, so you'll only be able to use a single Warcry, but they'll be instant. So you're pretty much playing as close as you can get, I feel like, to the physical version of Righteous Fire without doing any trigger Corrupting Fever shenanigans. So essentially how this works is you walk around your Warcry and left click, you use General's Cry, if I can find it here, because it has half the cooldown of other Warcries. Most Warcries have a base of 8 seconds cooldown. General's Cry has a 4-second cooldown. So every 1.4 seconds, your Warcry goes off. The Corrupted Blood stacks last 2 seconds base, and you can scale that up with skill effect duration. So closer to 3 seconds in total, which means if you have this thing on left click, even in like single target scenarios, as long as you're walking around and using it, you're going to have full uptime on your Corrupting Fever stack, so no worries about that. I said Corrupting Fever again, I mean Corrupted Blood. I obviously am not used to talking about these skills. So basically every roughly 1.5 seconds, you're walking around, you shout at stuff, and you apply a bunch of physical damage over time. And then in here, there's also some Fall Reap shenanigans to help with the single target damage. Now, one major concern might be the AoE, because, you know, Warcries might not have that big of an AoE, but they actually do, and I think people are going to realize how massive the AoEs can get on Corrupting Cry through Warcries. In this setup, 77 AoE radius. That's enough to cover all but the upper left and right hand corners of the screen, pretty much. You'll be a little bit away from the edge with 77, but I don't think by enough to really notice it. It's a very, very big AoE, and I don't think that's going to be an issue whatsoever. The other potential issue is the lack of scaling options. Physical damage over time has this problem in general. Kind of makes it annoying to build into, which is why you see people picking up Spiritual Aid for the minion damage scaling, for example. Corrupting Cry is especially bad because it's a support gem, and so you can't scale it with plus levels to skill gems. So instead, you have to do things like use gloves like this that are going to have the Essence mod 30% more damage over time and level of socketed AoE gems. This is pretty much your endgame sort of setup because, again, limited scaling options. And then because it's a support gem again in a 4-link with the support and your Warcry, that only leaves you with 2 supports, so the highest damage ones. You're not going to have any big losses there. There's some other stuff, but I won't go into a super ton of detail, but that's the general idea of the build, and I think this one is one of the stronger ones that I'm covering in this video in terms of potential. I think this one could be a sleeper hit, personally. I'm not going to start with it myself, but I am very interested in looking at it for potential restarts or speedrun testing sort of thing. So I may come back around to this one in the future. Next one is dslilly's Blade Blast Pathfinder. Bladefall Blade Blast used to be one of my favorite skill setups, builds I guess I should say, as an assassin before it got hit with a bunch of nerfs in various ways, and reworks and all this other stuff. So Pathfinder is definitely the way I would prefer to go now, and dslily has a pretty nice setup going here. The video I saw from her was before Crucible League, She showcased an occultist and then said she thinks Pathfinder is a bit better, and I do think Pathfinder's pretty good. We know it to be pretty good at this point. Master Surgeon performs about as well as expected, better than some other people expected. And then the general flask uptime and Pathfinder for poison is amazing because of the withered stacks, especially for a skill that's going to be hitting as frequently and as consistently as Bladefall Blade Blast. You don't have to worry about accuracy because they're spells, so you should have really good uptime on your withered stacks. Poison is getting a slight nerf in the form of the Temp Chains nerf, but shouldn't be a big deal in my opinion. This build runs a double curse setup, so a little less to worry about in the cursing department at least. Maybe you end up dropping some curse effect if you're not hitting certain breakpoints anymore. As an example, might have slightly less value there, but overall I think it's still going to be pretty good just with slightly less damage. Unless you sacrifice support instead of an existing support and it ends up being better. Let's see what the supports are. I haven't actually looked myself here. So, chance to poison. If you can manage to replace the poison chance, then you could directly replace chance of poison with sacrifice support. It would take some work to do this, of course, but sacrifice is a lot better than an added chaos damage, and historically at least, added chaos has been pretty good in these builds. So sacrifice, I think, is going to be competitive in a build like this for a couple reasons. One, the big damage. At 5k health, this build has 5050. It's about 440 added chaos damage. This chance to poison is adding just over 100. So almost 4 times as much added damage. You do obviously have to make up the chance of poison, as I said, but if you can do that, the damage looks very enticing. There's also the matter of mitigating the downside of sacrifice in that you're losing 20% of your health every time you cast the skill. And how do you do that? Well, Pathfinder, Master Surgeon. Life recovery is looking at 1400 at the moment. I don't know if that includes any sort of leech or life gain on hit, but those are also potential options. Regardless, in about 2/3 of a second, if you sacrifice 1000 life, you'll be back up to full with Master Surgeon. Another mitigating factor for this build in particular is it's a 2-skill build. You're going to use Bladefall every time you use Blade Blast. So you're spending a lot less time sacrificing your health. You're sacrificing your health less frequently. So there is not only more recovery, but less to recover from in terms of frequency. So I think that's looking pretty good. I have considered starting this one as well. I think the leveling might be a little rough because you tend to want to level as things like Caustic Arrow, Toxic Rain sort of things. And having just did a test run with one of those, I did not really like it. So this again might be a 2nd+ character for me, but I think even in solo self-found, this is going to be a pretty strong contender for a league starter. So I would put this up there as probably more reliable because there's more we know about it than the Corrupting Cry build, but I would put them on par as potentially good league starters even in solo self-found. And lastly, because 3 builds just really isn't enough to make a video about, I guess, I'll tack on an attack-based Guardian as a general concept. This is really just like a mock-up tree that I threw together for a bow-based Guardian. This one would have some leveling pains for sure because you probably don't want to play a bow Guardian right from Act 1. Sounds horrendous, so this is another one you would probably want to level as something else and then transition at some point, but it does look potentially good. You level as any melee skill, really, I feel like. Pick up some early damage closer to Templar, spec out of it at a later date. Or, I mean, if you're not going all the way across the tree like this is, and you're playing a more melee-focused build, for example, you could just stay in that area and not have to worry about the excessive traveling, and that would be a lot more smooth. And I'm suggesting this because of the power of Unwavering Crusade. If you have all 3 relics summoned, we're still assuming that you can have all 3 because that's what makes the most sense. If you have all 3 relics up, even excusing hatred from the equation, like hatred doesn't exist, you get 440 flat elemental damage from this node by having your minions up, which is amazing. So that's a lot of potential flat damage for something like a bow build. You're attacking quickly, which is a good vector to scale flat damage with. You're a little more defensive than something like a Deadeye, for example, because you can potentially summon the Sentinel Radiance. That's probably the iffiest part because it could just fall over without any proper support. But if you're running like Purity of Elements or something, for example, then you're making up for at least some of the fact that you're not properly supporting the minions. That's really the biggest question of how much proper support the minions will need to stay alive and support you in return. But if they aren't too hard to manage, then I think it's going to be pretty solid to do something like this, or even, like I said, a melee attack-based thing, Spectral Throw, things like that, where you're scaling the flat damage, or you can take advantage of the 2 multipliers of Hatred and Wrath for a spell, for example. I think this is going to be potentially really good. I know I've said that about all of them, but I wouldn't be making a video about them if I didn't think so, right? And more specifically, this gets better if you're going Calm Spirit and pick up Time of Need. Again, you're capping off your rage every 4 seconds, essentially. And with the Recovery Mastery, you're completely healing to full life every 4 seconds. So that does and will end up saving you from situations in which you are getting chunked a couple times. Like, say 3 big hits will kill you, and you take 2 and haven't recovered yet. Well, there's a pretty decent chance that you enter your 4th second at that point and immediately go back to full health. So, big potential there. On top of that, the block node I feel like is pretty strong, Bastion of Hope. If you can keep this up, which I do think you'll be able to, the attacks will be up all the time for attack-based builds, of course. Likewise for the spell-based builds. But I think it's easier for an attack-based build to cast a spell recently than it is for a spell-based build to attack recently. You can use things like shield charge and stuff for an attack-based or a spell-based build, but if you are an attack-based build, you probably have a guard skill on your left click, and guard skills are spells. So with sufficient cooldown, that'll be some pretty solid uptime on that. Basically, whenever you use a guard skill, it'll give you 4 seconds of plus 25% spell block, which is pretty solid. If you want to put in more effort to cast spells, or like you're cursing things, etc. against bosses, then it'll have better uptime. And then you can pick up Glancing Blows. With 25% of each block and Glancing Blows, you're sitting at 50%, but you take 65% of damage from blocked hits. That works out to 17.5% reduced damage taken at the cost of consistency. But that is almost Fortify levels from Champion. It's going to be a lot less consistent. It's going to work against less things because it's specific to spells and attacks, which not everything is either in a spell or attack. So it is going to be a bit worse there, but you could also invest more into it if you want to. So the option exists there, but just to kind of showcase the potential of just dipping into Glancing Blows if you're running by there because you're starting as a Templar, and the potentially consistent uptime of the conditional effects here. Anyways, that was it for me. Video ran a bit longer than I expected, but had a surprising amount to talk about. Let me know down in the comments if you think any of these are enticing. If you have a different off-meta league starter of your own you're going with, I'm definitely curious about that. And yeah, if I hope to make more videos, but if I don't talk to you again, or you don't watch any of my future videos, then good luck on League Start, and I'll catch you in the future. Peace.